Welcome to the Lighthouse Financial Advisors Money Over 50 podcast with Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue. This information is general in nature and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation or needs. Therefore, you should consider whether the information is appropriate for you and your personal circumstances. If you require personal advice, please contact Lighthouse Financial Advisors. Here are your hosts, Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue.
It's Dallas Davison here with Michael Hogue again today for our next episode of the Money Over 50 podcast. Today we're going to talk about an article that Michael recently wrote. It was actually called "What Are You Worried About?" So Michael, can you briefly explain what that article was about and your thoughts?
Yes, thanks Dallas. A bit of background. So Dallas and I, during September, recently attended the Tax Institute of Australia's 2019 Superannuation and Taxation training days, during which one of the sessions was an economic update. The economic update was by Craig James from ComSec. It was quite a good economic update.
As far as they go, yeah.
As far as they go. Before Craig had even started speaking, I'd come to the realisation that, geez, I've sat in on dozens of these things over the years, and none of them have any bearing on where we are right now in 2019. Yeah. They'd only ever told the story up until that point in time. Yeah. So, going way back when I first entered the industry in 2001, the 2001 economic update that I happened to sit in on at the time at whatever professional development day that I was at, told the story up until 2001. Yeah. The 2003 one told the story up until 2003. Yeah. None of that has had any bearing on where we are today. Yeah.
That's always the way, isn't it? Like with an economic update, is that it tends to follow the same sort of pattern, which is here are some statistics about things that have happened, in the last year, 5 years, whatever, and then at the very end there's normally a few things of, and we predict this to happen, and we predict this to happen, which is all just, basically, exists to make astronomy look respectable, those sorts of forecasts, because there's just no basis in fact, really.
It does, and I mean, we could get completely off topic here and we could digress a lot. What it's attempting to do is to predict those things that we have absolutely no control over, and that we're more or less wasting our time by engaging in, because we have no control over them. It's almost as if people try to lull themselves into the sense of control by merely talking about those things. So
I think that's exactly right. There's a lot of that where we sort of think, if we think about this and if we talk about this, then maybe we'll be able to read a pattern in, I always think it's no different to if you go to the casino and you see the roulette table and people will go, red came up these last 3 times, then black came up, then this happened, and it has no bearing on you. You cannot read that pattern looking forward, and that's I guess the main one of the points that you make there is that we don't know. We can have all the data, we can look at those things, we can't control that. We can't, not only can we not predict what's going to happen with that, but we can't, even if we could predict it, we can't control what's going to happen there anyway.
That's right. The second realisation that I had during Craig's talk was that, hey, as human beings, it suddenly dawned upon me, we actually have to have something to worry about as a species. And whether that's thrust upon us by the media, and Craig, although he's an economist, he is part of the media, which I would say is part of the problem, because bad news sells. So some of these worries are thrust upon us via the media. Yeah. But as he got through his talk, I went, geez, things have actually been pretty good in the last 10 years, but particularly good in the last 5 years. But the way that it was pitched was that we had some real concerns and some real worries.
Yeah.
And
that was kind of I guess your takeaway was that of what I know you had more numbers and a bit more detail in your article, but basically the main point was that things have been pretty good, and yet there's no way that we would see any news about how things have been really good over the last 5 years. It just doesn't come up at all.
That's right. I mean, some of the biggest concerns at the moment, recalling a Trump and Brexit. Now, there was no other information provided except for Trump was a concern and Brexit was a concern. It wasn't that Trump would cause this or Brexit would cause that.
That's right.
It was just Trump and Brexit. You had some ridiculous things in there, like the inverted yield curve, which I'm convinced is just made up. But when we got down to it, there was a lot of things that are presented as a real concern. I mean, if you read the paper or watched the news lately, the Reserve Bank of Australia is concerned that inflation isn't rising as much as it should be. Now, it seems ridiculous, doesn't it? The price of goods and services that we buy aren't going up. So we're concerned about that. And that's a meaningless stat without knowing at least one other stat. And that other stat is how is unemployment? And unemployment's really, really low at this point in time. So the chances are that you have a job. Costs aren't rising the way that the Reserve Bank would like them to rise. And it's meaningless without that. And it's probably meaningless without another stat, which is another concern, is that the people's wages aren't growing as much as the Reserve Bank of Australia would like as well. Now, if you marry that up with the fact that A, you probably have a job, and B, the cost of the things that you're buying aren't getting more expensive, then it's not as big of a problem as it's made out to be. The fact that your wages aren't growing with historical rates of growth.
And that, I guess, is exactly kind of the point that you're making, is that each of these things in isolation, you could pull that out and write a really catchy news headline about how wage growth has slowed, or this has happened, or the RBA is worried about this. But that touches on exactly what you're saying, which is that human nature is that we've got to latch hold of something to be worried about. It's just, the best way to get someone to worry is to say, don't worry. And so that's to me one of the points from your article, which we see all the time, is that it's never going to happen that you say to someone, don't worry about anything. We are human beings, we are going to latch onto something to be worried about. And so one of the main takeaways that you sort of said was that if you're going to worry about something, which you are because we're human beings, why don't we pick something that is actually useful and that we can do something about as the thing to worry about?
Yeah, that's correct. There's a great diagram by a guy called Carl Richards, who is known as the sketch guy. He's not that familiar in Australia, but he has a column in the New York Times. And he's known for his simple diagrams. And he has two circles, and we're speaking on a podcast, so I can't draw it for you. But there's one circle that says things that you should worry about. And there's another circle that intersects the first circle that says things that are inside of our control. And basically where those two circles intersect, that little area that's shaded out, are things that you should be worried about. Because there are so many things that you can't control, that none of us can control. Equally there are other unimportant things that people tend to worry about that possibly are in their control, but are unimportant in the grand scheme of things. So it's really only those important things and those things that we have some sort of control over or can impact upon.
I think that's probably
the things that we need to be worried about.
A great way to think of it as, like I say, we can't stop worrying about things, but it's probably a good test of, is this thing that I'm worried about worth my time? Is two things. Number one, first test, does it actually matter? Is it important? Does it matter to me at all? And that's only the first part of it. And I think that's where, like you're saying, we get caught up on that and worrying about things and taking things in isolation, and we worry about something that we think is important. But then the second bit of that is the very freeing part, I think, for most people. It's to go worrying about something that, even if it is important and even if it is an issue and even if it is something that is going to affect your life, the second step of that is the key, really, which is is there something I can do about it? Can I do something about that? Can I control that? And if not, then you're really just wasting your time and energy worrying about that, because I guess the other part of it is that your energy and your concerns are a finite resource. So
yes,
every minute that you spend worrying about that thing that you can't control is just a minute that you could be spending on something that you can actually control.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
So I guess as a good way to, as we sort of get towards the end, can you think of a list of a few things off the top of your head, that things that we shouldn't be worrying about, and things that, instead of spending that time on worrying about them, what should we be thinking about or concerned with?
Yeah, well, I'm a huge believer in controlling the inputs, and the outputs will take care of themselves.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're 10 years out from retirement right now, one of the great things to look at is to work backwards. So work out where you need to be at retirement from an assets point of view, and where your superannuation needs to be valued at. Work out what you can control is or what you know is how many fortnightly pays you have. And you have a maximum of 260 over that 10-year period. You can control, to an extent, some of the expenses, that is, where your money goes at the moment. So if you work backwards, you can work out, okay, how much do I need to put in to my superannuation fund, for example, on each one of those consecutive 26 fortnights. Now, inbuilt into that will be the assumption that you'll be paid over those 26 period pay packets. You have no control over that.
No, that's right.
Inbuilt into that will be you'll need X amount of rate of return to help you along the way on your superannuation, and that's whether it returns 3%, 4%, 5%, 8%, 10%. To an extent, you can give yourself the best chance of getting an 8% return if you choose one investment strategy over another. You have absolutely no control over whether you will hit that rate of return or not, because we can't control investment markets. But there's things that you shouldn't worry about that sort of stuff. You shouldn't worry about what the actual rate of return would be. You shouldn't worry about short-term noise, which is those investment markets dipping down for a period of time. This is all just noise designed to distract you. Certainly, there's an entire industry out there called the media that will gladly throw that in your face when that happens, because they're in the business of selling newspapers, and they sell newspapers by worrying people. But just legitimately the things that you can have some sort of impact and control over.
I think that's a good example of the returns on your superannuation fund over the last 10 years. If you've got 10 years to go, it's the same thing where it is an important thing and it's something that you need to get right. But worrying about it month to month doesn't help. What you actually need to do is sit down and work out a plan of, okay, what can I do with my retirement savings? That is, how can I invest that money in a way that is going to maximise the likelihood of getting me the return that I need? And I'm going to do everything that I can to get that return and to make that happen.
Yes.
And then I'm going to put that aside. And instead of worrying about that week to week, about is the markets up, down, sideways, I've done all the worrying about that I can. I've controlled every bit of that I possibly can. I've invested my retirement savings in the best way for me. Now, what I can control every fortnight is, like you say, your savings rate. How much money am I putting aside for that? I think that's, I guess, another part of it is that within each of these bits, there is only so much you can control, and it's a similar thing we see with your saving rate, where if you're spending $60,000 a year, there's probably some low-hanging fruit of the first $10,000 of savings. If you really need to try and cut back on those expenses, you can probably find that first $10,000 pretty easy. But then after that, you're probably just going to torture yourself and worry about it and stress about it to try and find every extra dollar of savings that just might not be there.
Yes, that's right.
It's the same kind of thing where even with something you can control, which is your savings, let's worry about it, let's think about it as much as we need to get a plan in place and to make that happen. And then once we've got a budget, we've got a system in place where we're putting aside the money we need to, just don't worry about it week to week. Just go and enjoy your life, and don't spend more time worrying about that than what you're actually going to get from it.
That's right. I mean, it's certainly the feedback that we get from a lot of our clients, as you know, is that they love having the plan in place because they can put it out of their mind to an extent then. Yeah. Where we say, it's this much every fortnight, and we obviously pick up the low-hanging fruit, like you said, as well, where we get the maximum tax deductions that they can achieve for that year. Give themselves the best chance of getting the return that they need. Can we control what the government does for tax rates next year or tax deductions? No, we can't. We can move with the times. Can we control what the investment markets do in the short term? Certainly not. They'll be up, down and sideways. But certainly sticking to the plan does pay off for people and having a plan in place.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. Is that so? I guess my thoughts or my takeaways from the article that you wrote were: whenever you find yourself worrying about something to do with your financial situation, there's two steps there. Is number one, does this matter at all? And second step, can I control it? And it's only if you answer yes to both those questions that you then need to, as you say, sit down and come up with a plan around how can I control this in the best possible way.
Yes. Just before we wrap up too, can I say it's great to be back in the podcast booth with you. So it's been a while. So it's our most recent podcast that went up, which is called Why 99% of People Shouldn't Have a Self-Managed Superannuation Fund. We actually shot that at the end of May.
Really?
It was because in that podcast we made reference to the fact that I forgot my wife's birthday, which I know to be on the 28th of May. Looking back, so it's been a while. We shot that podcast then. I mean, we had others since then, but just most recently we've had 4 really good podcasts with special guests. So we had 3 with Maria Pandalo from Travel Managers.
We'll probably get feedback from this one saying, get rid of that Dallas guy. We want some more guests back.
It's really good to be back. I think I've missed arguing with you, and we haven't really argued that much in this podcast. But
it's probably a new experience where you've written something and I've just gone, yeah, I agree with all of that. Normally I'd be sitting on the side taking pot shots at things that I disagreed with.
Maria and Kathy, our podcast guests, were far too kind and pleasant and polite to argue with me. So it's something I've really missed. So it's good to be back in the podcast.
I'm sure that the next one we record, there'll be something that I want to can. So it's real good.
No worries. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Money Over 50 podcast with Lighthouse Financial Advisors. We look forward to catching up again soon.